Urban school districts face huge problems, and their students, on the whole, are far behind their peers in wealthier suburban districts. Is there anything we can do to turn urban school districts around, or are they just too big, too poor, and too dysfunctional to manage? This is the Penn GSE Edcast, where you get perspectives on education and social science from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education. I'm your host, Tom Ketchkamethy. Few people know more about running urban schools than Torch Lytle. His first name is James, but he goes by Torch. He spent many years in the school district of Philadelphia as a principal and regional administrator before moving on to Trenton, New Jersey, where he was superintendent of schools for 8 years. Now he's a practiced professor of education here at Penn, leading our public school partnerships. And he teaches school reform, organizational theory, and school leadership. Torch and I talked about what it takes to make a large urban school district work. In Torch's view, there are a couple of important things that urban district leadership can do to give their schools a chance at successful reform, if only politicians and the public have the patience to let them. What I'm really wondering is whether or not the model of large city districts is reasonable and sustainable. Is effective leadership of big city schools even possible, given the many discontents and challenges that face these school leaders? And is the job just too big and too complicated to expect districts as large as Philadelphia, New York, LA Unified to thrive or have any hope of improving student outcomes? Where do your thoughts go when you first hear me ask that question about big city districts?
Well, my first argument would be that, or first question would be whether urban school districts are supposed to work at all, or whether what really we are watching is a sort of charade and a pretense that we are trying to do school. One way I think about this is to look at what the independent day school tuition is in a particular community. And in Philadelphia right now, it's about $25,000 a student. So we are talking about kids from advantaged families, for the most part, who can afford to pay almost full tuition for any of these schools, Penn Charter, Germantown Friends, Episcopal, etc. The per pupil expenditure for kids in comparable schools, for the public schools in Philadelphia, would range between $10,000 and $12,000, and maybe in a few high schools with certain special programs it might be $15,000 a student. Essentially, people who run large urban districts are being asked to improve performance for the neediest kids for half the cost of the kids who go to independent school, who don't need a whole lot of improvement to begin with. But I am very aware of all of the resources that are provided to kids in independent schools and upscale suburban schools. And so to me, part of the challenge of leading either a school or a district in an urban community is to access as much social and organizational and intellectual capital as you can get your hands on. The simple version, in my experience, was when I was principal of University City High School, which happens to be about 2 blocks from the Penn campus. And it educates kids from north of Market from about 30th Street out to the 60s. So historically it's been a very poor community with very limited community resources. Yet it's 2 blocks from Penn and 1 block from Drexel. So our strategy while I was principal was to take every possible advantage we could of the 2 universities nearest us and whatever other organizations we could hook up with. Most importantly, the University of Pennsylvania Hospital. So as an example, we had 2 special ed classes of kids with relatively limited ability. And instead of meeting at the high school, the classes actually met at the hospital. We had the teachers there. We had classrooms that provided pro bono by the hospitals. The kids would spend part of the morning in sort of basic skills classes, and then they'd do internships all over the hospital, working in the laundry, kitchen, mailroom, on and on. And that experience had a really powerful effect on the kids. So by the time they finished high school, you'd find it very difficult to determine that they actually had special needs. A number of them actually wound up getting jobs from the hospital.
As a principal, you were able to organize your effort around that school and those kids in that school. And it seems to me like that's a necessarily, tidier and neater group of folk to work with. Not just the kids in the school, but the resources surrounding that school. It seems a whole lot more complicated for a superintendent.
Well, you can ask me about either Philadelphia or Trenton. The scale is different, but Trenton is the state capital, so among the entities that we collaborated with were certain divisions of state government. For example, we had a business and technology program at the high school, and we formed a relationship with the Department of the Treasury where kids at the high school would work in the afternoons on a paid basis. They became part-time employees. And the opportunity for them was that when they finished high school, they could be hired as full-time employees by the department in clerical and support positions. But the department also had a tuition reimbursement scheme, so kids could go to college part-time and have their tuitions paid by Treasury. Now, when we are talking about Trenton, you have Educational Testing Service not far away. Merrill Lynch's largest back office in the country is just across the Trenton border in Hopewell. Princeton University, College of New Jersey, on and on. So, I mean, the direct response to your question would be that we formed all sorts of partnerships with all sorts of agencies. Is it harder to do in the big city? Yes, but you sort of have to think that way. You have to sort of look at the city. I mean, if you're a superintendent in Philadelphia, how do you look at the city and say, how am I going to get any enterprise I can get my hands on to support our work? And from my point of view, it doesn't matter whether it's churches, boys' clubs, corporations, hospitals, whatever else. But back to the market idea. There is the public school and charter school version of the market. Then within the public schools, there are selective schools and citywide admission schools and neighborhood schools and so on. So there's an institutional market within most urban districts. I mean, New York really dramatically increased the number of high school options within the public school system by breaking down large high schools and converting them into lots of sort of mini high schools. New York's had a fair amount of success with that approach. The dropout rate has been substantially reduced and the high school completion rate has been increased. Regrettably, there are no other big cities I know of that have really tried to emulate New York, but the case of New York would make a good argument for at least that level of solution. The schools had enough holding power so that kids were able to continue on them.
What have the results been of that experiment in New York?
Well, much higher proportion of kids completing high school and dramatic decrease in dropout rates. I think at about the 20% level. In other words, 20% more kids graduating and 20% fewer dropping out.
So this goes back to my question really about whether or not urban education is just too unwieldy and too large to manage effectively. That the New York example would be an example of breaking it down into smaller chunks that are more manageable, right?
I mean, any high school I've ever been directly involved with has been subdivided into small learning communities or whatever you want to call them, generally with about 250 kids and a designated faculty. 250 sort of works organizationally in a school in terms of number of teachers and providing an adequate array of courses and so on.
Right, but what I'm hearing from you so far in response to my biggest question picture, which is, are large urban districts just too unwieldy to manage? What I'm hearing from you is not necessarily. It all kind of depends on what you do, from the higher levels of district management to empower local communities. Is that fair?
Yeah, in fact, I'd say that that's the approach that the Bloomberg-Klein administration followed in New York. They aggressively decentralized the district.
So this is fine. Say that, I buy into this logic of decentralization, carving up and making smaller as one of the necessary key components to improvement in large districts, right? That's all fine if you have consistent leadership pressing that message, right? And one of the problems that we face is a kind of abysmal lack of consistency in evidence-based approaches to leadership at district levels. So what do you make of that after your experience? Is it just an intractable problem?
I think the evidence is increasingly persuasive on exactly this point, that leadership stability has a lot to do with long-term success of either schools or districts, and that instability has all kinds of deleterious effects. And increasingly, especially in large cities, the superintendent and the mayor are paired. This was true when I was in Trenton. The mayor was directly involved in the selection process. I had a very good working relationship with the mayor, which certainly made my job a lot easier, but I also understood that it was the mayor's city and not mine, and I accepted that. I didn't, for all sorts of reasons, I didn't feel that it would make any sense for the district to ever position itself in opposition to the mayor. Particularly because, and I think part of the reason for this, especially in big cities, is that as the federal government has gotten more involved in policy making and in interventions in both states and school districts, at least at the policy level, that you need all the political muscle you can get your hands on in order to either protect or grow your district. And that means congressional delegations, senators, your state legislative delegation, and so on.
So political expediency and our own social history push us away from the kind of consistency that's most beneficial to urban district management.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you link mayors and superintendents, you're linked into the election system. And in fact, one of the problems is that elected officials want short-term results. If you're up for election every 4 years, you want evidence by the end of the third year that things are on a dramatically improved course. And school turnarounds take longer than that. The data shows that it takes 4 to 5 years to redirect an elementary school and 5 to 6 to redirect a high school. And the politicians usually don't have that level of patience.
The Penn GSE Edcast is a production of the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education, and it's produced by me with editorial assistance from John Wallace and technical direction from Kaja Novatsky. For more about Torch's work, you can visit our website, www.gse.upenn.edu. Thanks for downloading. See you next time.